In our last tutorial, you may well have noticed that a lot of when I was sort of drawing objects, they were snapping to each other. So for example, if I'd started to draw here, and I've drawn out a line there, if I want to draw another line, so I'll finish that one, if I wanted to draw a line, another one, you can see it kind of snaps to the end there, and there's this big orange sort of rectangle or square that goes around the end point. And there's another one that goes around that end point. And what's happened there is the cursor has sort of found the end of that line and it said, well, we can snap to that. And that's what we're going to talk about now, are object snaps. So this little icon down here, if I left click on that, left click on it, okay, let's right click on it then. We've got endpoint, center, intersect, extension. We've got a whole load of things that we can pick from here. Now if I just want to turn on midpoint, I can just left click on midpoint and then I can right click and repeat my line, and now I've got a triangle that finds my midpoint and my end point. Okay, so if I was going to draw a circle, it could go maybe from the midpoint off to the end point there. Okay, so there's a circle with a line through it. It doesn't really need to mean anything at the moment, really just learning about sort of the whys and the hows and the wherefores. What I can do with this as well is if I open this up, you've got this thing, settings. Okay, so what I want to do is just briefly, and you see we have this settings dialog come up here. What I briefly want to do is just discuss what some of these object snap modes do, which are going to be the most common ones that you're going to use to begin with at this stage, and sort of what they mean and how they work. So what we've got here is we've got our endpoint, which is obviously going to be the end point of any line, the midpoint, which is going to be the middle of it, and the center, which is the center point of any circle. That's fairly obvious. We do have some things called nodes as well, and nodes are just like dummy objects that you find inside of AutoCAD. And what happens with them is that they can be placed, and you can then use those for markers. So if you want to do something called like a multi-line, then you can use these nodes as markers for your multi-line. Quadrant is quite useful, mainly used with circles. You can pick sort of like the 4 compass points, as it were, of a circle, which is very useful. Intersection and extension we'll probably get into a little bit more when we start talking about object snap tracking in a moment. But we've also got things like perpendicular and tangent. Okay, so tangential is going to pick a tangential point to this circle. It's exactly as it sounds. Yeah, nearest is quite useful. So if I take off, say, midpoint and center here, and I click OK, and I want to create a line, I can actually just go, and you can see here we're picking the nearest object, which is that line there, and then we're going to go off from it. So it doesn't really matter where I go here, it's really just the indication of how it works. And if I was to zoom in there, you'd be able to see that this line does indeed start from very, very close to that circle. There we go, it looks a bit like a Death Star, doesn't it? So remember, if I want to change my settings, I'll right click in there, go to settings, and I'll reset this to the way it was before, midpoint and center, and I'll leave those two and click OK. If I don't want this switched on, I'll just very quickly give it a light left click and it deselects, and then I left click it again and it reselects. So now if I left click and I want to create a line, I've got absolutely no way, I'm stuck with my input basically. So what I'm going to do is turn that on, and then, oh look, I've got a center point there, and there we go. Easily created a line. So we're now sort of creating a bit of a pie graph or something. Other things that we'll notice with our objects, let me just turn that off for the moment. When I select it, are these grab handles that we've got here. Okay? So I can grab that line and I can completely rechange its position. So say I just created a line like that, I can take hold of this grab handle here at the end, and I can move it so that it snaps to the midpoint of that line. And there you go, we've partitioned that segment. I can also use those grab handles to make objects half as big. So you see there, there's our half as big line. And if I was going to make this line half as big, and then I wanted the circle to match it, I might grab one of the circle's points, and I think that's probably going to be a little bit more difficult. Maybe I'll take the center point there and I'll snap to the midpoint of that circle. There we go. And then I'll take this end point and I'll snap. There we go. So I've changed the radius. So a little bit more than I was expecting there, but never mind. I can then reselect this line and I'll put 1 point there, and I'll take 1 point and I'll put it there. So there you go. What we've actually done is I've kind of scaled it down by 50% without actually using the scale tool. So things to look out for there are your grab handles. You can see here this one's going to change the radius. Let's just undo that. This one's going to change the length. The middle one will change the position. Yeah, so I can get this to snap onto the midpoint, onto the end of that line. Okay, so again, very, very useful. You'll find you'll be using this time and time again, this whole way of working. If I create something like a rectangle, and then I reselect it, you'll find that the points can be completely moved and altered and changed, and you can make a completely different shape with that. So again, you've got something else to sort of think about and to work with. If I was to create a curve, and I'll just do a 3-point curve, there we go, and I reselect it, we've got various different options here. I can pick up and move the curve as is from its center point. I can take this part of the curve and I can actually change the diameter of the curve and lots of other things as well. I can also change here, this is the size of the curve or the stretch point. And I can also say how far round, so I can actually extend that curve round as well, as much as I want. And again, all of these things have got numeric inputs. Yeah? So all very, very useful and very, very easy to use as well.